Hey, Sam. How's it going on this casual Friday?
Oh yeah, it doesn't feel so casual. Look at that great new stand you have.
Oh, yeah. It's a little bit big for my frame, but I've angled it down and I think it's going to work. So thank you.
Maybe you need some type of gooseneck. It is a little bit.
I think you should put it on the other side also.
Other side?
Because it's shadowing on you a little bit. There you go. Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Oh yeah.
Here we go.
There we go.
All right, that's great. And maybe put like a little logo right on the thing.
That's a good idea. Always be branding.
Exactly. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about the Tara Reid thing. It's always really stressful for me to see it in the news and get angry all over again at the society we live in, which clearly doesn't care about victims of sexual assault. The Democratic Party, which only cares when it suits them politically. And, all the men who've ever wronged me in my life. Other than that, I'm doing great.
Well, do you want to say a couple of things?
Sure. Oh boy. Well, let's see. I'm going to start out by quoting Marx, as I often do, when he said, history repeats itself. The first time is tragedy, and the second is farce. And I think we're seeing that happen now with the Tara Reid stuff, because it's like a Technicolor replay of everything that happened with Bill Clinton in the 90s, right? Like, I guess I should back up and say first that I believe her. There was a lot of concurrent reporting, which we're seeing come out, and the story rings very true to me, as I'm sure it does many survivors of sexual assault and workplace sexual harassment. It's very normal for survivors to change their stories based on cues they're getting about how they're going to be received if they don't feel safe. Of course, they're not going to tell you the whole thing. I said like 6 months ago on this show that I wouldn't be surprised if Biden had a Me Too coming.
Right.
And people thought that sounded a little far-fetched, but this stuff exists on a continuum. And seeing the way that he touches women in public, it's not that surprising to me that he'd also do it in a worse way in private. If you listen to him on Morning Joe today, he wouldn't even say that he remembers her, which makes me sick, but is also probably true because, like he said, she was nothing to him. He did it incredibly casually, and also he's fucking senile. So I believe that he probably doesn't remember it, and he's just used to having people cover up for his. I mean, this is like another side point about how maybe people shouldn't be in positions of immense power for that long, because it tends to both attract people who like having power over others, and also it can corrupt people, right? So going forward, like the Democrats have bet on the fact that nobody's going to care about this, and on a societal level, they're probably right.
Let me just ask you what you mean by the Democrats. I mean, because we're talking about a universe of people who would vote for the Democratic nominee, right?
I'm talking about the leaders of the party.
Okay.
The people who, the institution itself. I'm not talking about the voters. The voters largely vote based on how their trusted institutions have signaled to them is a good way to vote. I'm not putting the blame on them. But we saw this during the Kavanaugh hearing, right? I was 100% sure nothing was going to come of it because this society does not care about survivors of sexual assault. And at the time, a lot of Democrats were saying the right things. They were right about this. That guy should not be on the Supreme Court. Now we have a bunch of people who said that stuff back then, deleting their old tweets about it and turning around and doing exactly what the Republicans were doing to Christine Blasey Ford, attacking her character, attacking her as a Russian asset, saying she's got a screw loose. It's disgusting. and I know that I've argued for the Me Too movement in the past because although it itself is not a radical phenomenon that has a limited analysis, but it can point in radical directions, right? If we turn it into a conversation about power and the wider problems of the things that suck about having to work for a boss who has absolute power over you, right? But I think Me Too itself has been largely corrupted and co-opted by the establishment. We see this with Anita Dunn's relationship with Time's Up. This person should not be in charge of this kind of thing. And it's entanglements with the NGO industrial complex, which basically exists to launder the reputations of wealthy liberals and their children. They do some good work, but it is essentially a bourgeois institution in that it upholds the existing power structures. So maybe we need a different kind of Me Too that has a more radical analysis, a more independent existence independently of these bourgeois institutions. I don't know. It's just, it's really depressing to me, and it's depressing to see the Democratic Party going the same route that they went with Bill Clinton, right? Like, we have 2 alleged rapists running for president, and I really think a socialist feminist analysis is the only thing that can explain it right now.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is too that the broad Democratic electorate, I mean, I think in the same reasons why they supported Biden to the extent that they did in the first place. Also, I don't know if doesn't care is the right word, or they just want it to go away. And the easiest way for it to go away is for them to dismiss it. And, you know, I think it is indicative of, this dynamic of when you have, someone like Donald Trump in the presidency, because you end up having to just simply weigh. It's like, I don't know, it's like the trolley. I don't even remember what the trolley dilemma is, but I feel like it's one of those where, you're just weighing these two options. And those are the 2 options that you have. And that's problematic. I mean, I think we brought up Al Franken. I think the assessment at that time was that the political price to be paid by maintaining these standards was not large enough to not maintain the standards. I know there's a lot of double negatives in there. But in other words, I think that let's put it this way. I think that if Minnesota was a red state and there was a Republican governor there who would appoint a Republican senator to replace Al Franken, I think he would have gotten that investigation. I think he would have been there for the Senate investigation. I think that there wouldn't have been nearly the same pressure to get him out. But it was the political price was simply not as high as it would have been had he been replaced not by a Democratic politician. And so I think that's the reality of our society.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying that voters are weighing the options right now, but they've only been given one option, right? People who hate Trump and want to get him out. Like, they have been told that Joe Biden is the only option. So I think...
Well, the vast majority of them voted for Biden.
Yeah, because they were led to believe that he was the only option. And I think it's a tough square to circle, but I like to look at it through the lens of depoliticization and ideology, right? Ideology is not just somebody's conscious political opinions. Right? We all have ideology. It's conscious, it's subconscious, it's based on our conditions, which are often shifting. And ideology can cause depoliticization because many people in this world, especially working class people who are used to getting so little and just the long march into neoliberalism these past few decades. They believe, perhaps, with lots of evidence to support this belief, that a better world is not possible, right? This is the world that we have, and the Democrats' tepid, rapey but slightly less rapey neoliberal incrementalist politics are the only alternative to a rising proto-fascist authoritarian right. And I also think that certain kinds of fear-mongering about Trump really don't help matters. Like, Trump is certainly bad. Republicans are bad in general. I don't think he is a uniquely bad Republican. I think George W. Bush is definitely responsible for more deaths at this point in time, although we'll see as this crisis progresses. So it's not surprising to me that people would behave and vote in certain ways, or not vote, right? Because lots and lots of working class people don't vote at all under the current conditions.
Right. I mean, but I think that's I think that assessment is valid, but it's also generic, and in the sense that, look, that may be the case. We just ran an experiment, at least if without a long-term sustained effort to organize people and to change that consciousness and those belief sets, what would happen if you ran Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders in, against ultimately to face Donald Trump? There's no surprise that the candidate who came from the last administration and had been, a 40-year Democratic, part of the Democratic institution, was going to get the support of all of those, instruments of power that existed. And so there's still a significant number of people, the majority, who voted thus far in the Democratic primaries. Yes, they did get signals from the media. Yes, they did get signals from the Democratic Party that Joe Biden was their guy. In some respects, it was less than maybe one would anticipate, I think, as a function of people like having legitimate concerns about Joe Biden's abilities, just sheer abilities. But that's the reality of where we're at now. And it's also, so there is, it's a shitty situation. And I guess, like, with that said, right? Like, because the critique that you're making, I think is legitimate, and in one form or another, maybe not necessarily in the same language, but it's a critique that I've made for years, and it is the case. But now we have a different reality. We cannot go back 10 years or 15, 20 years and do the work that was yet to be done. We need to do it going forward in terms of like building a consciousness of the way that our system and our government works. I'm not as wed, I think, as you are to the notion that we need a very a coalition that is sort of like narrowly or constructed, and I don't mean narrow in terms of actual numbers, because I think there's more numbers of those people, but narrowly constructed in terms of like class interests, as you do. But broadly speaking, their relationship to power and there needs to be infrastructure built so that the next time that we get a Bernie Sanders style candidate, there's just simply more power there, that more than 30% of the electorate votes for him, or that other people come out and vote that didn't vote before. But here we are with this scenario. And so then, that's what sucks about this, is because this is what we're stuck with for the time being anyways. And there is no amount of assessment. We got a 6-month time frame now. almost exactly 6 months. We're talking 180 days. So I don't have any other answer. Anything else to say beyond that? It sucks.
No, it sucks. We have our work cut out for us. And I think, the Bernie movement taught us a lot of things. I think my hope is that it ultimately did strengthen the left. But I think, I forget who said this, but solidarity has to be experienced to be believed, right? And we have lots of chances before the next presidential election, before the next any kind of election, to be building working class institutions, to be building solidarity. I mean, the material conditions themselves will give rise to a lot of this, right? We've been seeing strike actions arise seemingly overnight all over the country. We're seeing a massive strike today, right? You talked about it with Instacart workers, Whole Foods workers, other kinds of workers walking out and fighting for their rights. And I think that solidaristic experience will do much more for class consciousness and bubble up into the electoral sphere in a way that it could not simply by running a campaign based around people's material interests.
I hope so.